never been accused of being quiet, so we can do that. All right, you guys ready? All right, excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Congresswoman Kat Kamak. I proudly represent Florida's 3rd Congressional District, the Gator Nation. And I want to thank everyone for being here today, especially on short notice, and a special thanks to my colleagues here for joining me as we stand against these unconstitutional mandates. So, obviously we represent Florida, the Sunshine State, aka the Freedom State, and we are gathered here today in formal opposition to the unconstitutional, un-American, and unconscionable mandates that are rocking our communities. There is no doubt that we are all united in fighting against COVID-19. However, the actions of this administration have left Americans across the country behind, hurting, and now in limbo. Divisive rhetoric from the Biden administration targeting those who opt out for medical, personal, or religious reasons, as is their right as an American, are being targeted. 1 in 3 first responders are opting not to receive the vaccination, and Biden's response is that they should be fired. It's funny how at the height of the pandemic, our nation's first responders were deemed heroes. Today, under this administration, those same heroes are now being considered villains and threatened with termination. My own husband, Matt, who is a firefighter SWAT medic in the city of Gainesville, who is here with me today, has faced this battle in our hometown. Today, my colleagues and I stand here in opposition to these arbitrary mandates, and we have stories from home to share about how this administration and Nancy Pelosi, as well as Schumer, are hurting everyday Americans. From nurses pulling shifts to police officers and firefighters on the front lines. We also want to share some of the work that we are collectively doing to stop these mandates through legislative action, as well as exercising our power through congressional inquiry. Let's chop the field. Today, the Biden administration currently has issued several executive actions, but in particular, we are focused on just a few. The first executive action mandates that all federal employees across the country be vaccinated by November 22nd of this year. This order was issued on September 9th. There is no option for federal employees to engage in regular testing in lieu of vaccination. Federal employees, however, are eligible for medical and religious exemptions. The second executive order, also issued on September 9th, was related to federal contractors and subcontractors. This executive order demands that all federal contractors be vaccinated by December 8th, with, again, regular testing not being available as an option. Religious and medical exemptions are being considered. The third mandate of great concern to us here today is the requirement for private, and I emphasize private, businesses with 100 or more employees to require vaccinations or weekly testing. This is a gross overreach of federal authority and an unfunded mandate. This is being done through an emergency temporary standard, which, while labeled temporary, will have long-lasting and devastating consequences for private businesses. As of today, nearly 80 million workers will be impacted, with congressional Democrats and OSHA and the Biden administration announcing up to $700,000 in fines per company for non-compliance. That is outrageous, it is unacceptable, and again, a gross overreach of this administration, which has run amok. Nothing in the Constitution permits this federal government to force private businesses to impose a mandate on their employees. It is unconscionable that this president would force private health decisions upon individuals, or else they be terminated, especially in the midst of a pandemic that has resulted in the loss of jobs for millions of Americans. How dare Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer claim to fight for the working class, our frontline workers, who have braved the pandemic on the front lines with no questions asked, and then turn around and declare them villains when they don't want to comply with these unconstitutional mandates. My Florida colleagues and I are standing in strong opposition and fighting on behalf of all Floridians who are now being subjected to the cruel and unconstitutional overreach of this Biden regime. Today we are highlighting in particular key legislation like the Freedom from Mandates Act, the Health Freedom for All Act, the No Taxation Without Congressional Consent Act, the prohibition of any requirement that a member of the armed forces receive a vaccination, and the Natural Immunity is Real Act. I would also like to announce that today our office is launching a web portal for any constituents in Florida's 3rd Congressional District who are faced with these mandates, that they have an ally. This portal is being hosted on our website, camac.house.gov, and allows constituents to log their issues and claims and allow us to advocate on their behalf. We're also proud to stand with our governor, Governor Ron DeSantis, who just this morning, a few minutes ago, announced a lawsuit against the Biden administration and NASA for their unconstitutional overreaching mandate. Thank you to Governor DeSantis and AG Ashley Moody for their leadership at the state level to protect our constituents and Floridians. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who are going to share some of the great work that they are doing on behalf of Floridians to push back against these mandates. And at this time, I'm going to start with Representative Byron Donaldson.
Go get it.
Don't worry, she's gonna lose. Anyway, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for joining us. Listen, we're at a very unconscionable time in our republic. Never has the chief executive mandated that people in our country must be injected with something in such a short amount of time. This has never occurred. Right now, we have people who are working on the front lines who are going to lose their jobs because they are making the decision not to take a vaccine. Think about this for a moment. You're talking about in our hospitals where you're going to have nurses who are going to be fired simply because they chose not to take a vaccine. How are these hospital systems actually supposed to work if they lose 10 to 20% of their workforce? What's actually going to happen to the people who are going to visit our hospitals who may need help associated with COVID-19 or any other health issues if our hospital systems simply do not have the staffing levels because of what this president did? Because frankly, he's flailing. He has no plan. He's never had a plan. And what he's trying to do is to dictate his desires on the American people. I stand with Governor DeSantis, and I stand with the members of the Florida legislature, my former colleagues, standing up to these ridiculous mandates, which fly in the face of freedom. They fly in the face of liberty. They have no place in our government. They have no place in our society. And for the people who would say that we have to save lives, I will tell you this. The number one thing we must always protect is your ability to choose what you do with your own health care. We have HIPAA laws in this country. With HIPAA laws in this country, no employer is actually allowed to ask you what's going on with your medical condition. But because of Joe Biden and his reckless dictatorial mandates coming out of this administration, he wants to now tell employers to do his dirty work for them. This OSHA rule hasn't even been written yet, even though he threw it out there. He wants to find companies in the midst of an economy that's actually going down fast, where inflation is rampant, where our supply chains are overrun and they're not functioning. And yet he wants to bring in unconscionable mandates that are going to cost business owners tens of thousands of dollars per occurrence. By allowing business owners to make responsible decisions. We've done it while providing people information. We've done it by actually bringing forward treatments like Regeneron, something that the federal government and Joe Biden didn't even know existed until Ron DeSantis employed it in Florida. We employed it in 22 clinics throughout our state. It has worked wonders. It worked so well that the Biden administration had to pull back Regeneron from the great state of Florida because they didn't want Ron DeSantis to be right again. But what you've seen in Florida is that our case rates have dropped dramatically. If you look at our state per capita, we're in the middle of the country with respect to cases and hospitalizations. We've worked wonders by trusting our people, not trusting politicians to make political decisions instead of making scientific decisions. So the facts are clear. We stand in opposition to these mandates. It is reckless. It's obscene. It should never happen in a free society. And the number one thing we want to tell all of you today is that Governor DeSantis has proven once again, Republican or Democrat, whether you're liberal, conservative, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're black or white, he stands to protect your freedoms. And the only person in this country who seeks to remove your freedom is the current president of the United States, who's too busy worrying about some deal he can take to Glasgow, Scotland, as opposed to standing up and doing his job which is protecting the liberties of all people in these United States. It should never be allowed to happen. We stand with Governor DeSantis. We stand with the actions that will come from Florida's legislature, and we will prove again that Florida is not only the best state in the country, it is the freest state in the country, and that is why people from all over America have moved to Florida over the last 18 months.
You lie, people die. You lie, people die.
Thank you, Representative Donalds. Up next, from Florida's 2nd Congressional District, Representative Neil Dunn.
Thank you very much, Kat. Thank you, Byron, for your words. I just in Florida alone, tens of thousands of hard-working men and women in President Biden's ill-considered vaccine mandates, including nurses, but even construction workers on federal projects could lose their jobs on this. There will be less access to care. The White House, the CDC, and the NIH have all completely ignored natural immunity. We are asking the wrong question. We should not be asking, have you been vaccinated? We should be asking, are you immune? And we can know the answer to that question. We have excellent testing, very sensitive, very specific, very accurate. If you wonder if you've got immunity, whether from your vaccine or from natural infection, you can know the answer to that question. You just get the right test, and it's a T-cell test, not an antibody test. We can do that, and we can promulgate this test throughout the country for less than 0.1% of what Operation Warp Speed costs. This is a negligible cost, given the money that we've saved, that would ensure that T-cell testing is covered the same way antibody tests are covered. It also directs the NIH and the CDC to do studies and research on T-cell immunity to this SARS-CoV-2 virus. You can know if you're immune. Let's let science guide our decision making. The Biden administration must consider natural immunity along with vaccination, and they can't make policy without them. How many of our military, our medical professionals, our federal construction workers, how many of them have to lose their job before this president wakes up and follows the science? This should not be a partisan issue. Kat, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Representative Neil Dunn. Up next, from South Florida, my good friend, Representative Carlos.
26th Congressional District. Before that, actually, but what I am is a firefighter. I started my career as a firefighter. I became the fire chief of the city of Miami. And as mayor of Miami-Dade County, I've led the largest police and fire departments in the southeast United States. When I stood in the White House with President Biden not too long ago, he told me that he was forever thankful for firefighters for saving his son's life and for saving his life. But now it turns out that all that support he told me about isn't really real, because when it comes to supporting our firefighters, our first responders, he has turned his back on them in a callous way, saying they needed to be fired. Our firefighters, our first responders, our medical workers have been working for over a year and a half to keep us safe. And now because of this mandate, this unnecessary, I believe, unconstitutional mandate, many of our workers are going to find themselves out of a job at a time when we need them. We need them every single day. They're here to protect us, protect our lives, protect the lives of our children and our grandchildren. And now because of this mandate, many of them will be finding themselves without a job, and we will be finding ourselves without the first responders, without the medical personnel that we need to take care of us. Luckily, in the state of Florida, we have a governor who's standing up to support our first responders and support all those who sacrifice so much for our communities. I applaud Governor DeSantis for standing up for first responders when it comes to this vaccine mandate, defending their choice, and it is America. And believe me, about 30% of the first responders in my community are not taking the vaccine. And that's, and I am not anti-vaccine. I had COVID-19. I've taken the vaccine. I've had my booster. So I'm not anti-vaccine. What I am is pro-choice, the ability of our people to want to have the vaccine or not. So I applaud Governor DeSantis for standing up again for our first responders when it comes to this vaccine mandate, their choice, and making sure that their livelihoods and those of their children, their grandchildren, their families, are not jeopardized by this unconstitutional vaccine mandate. Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you, Representative Jimenez. At this time, I'd like to welcome my good friend, Representative Dan Webster.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I'm not opposed to anything other than vaccine mandates. Healthcare decisions should be made between the healthcare provider and the citizen, whoever that may be, and not a result from Washington politicians. While President Biden hid in his basement last year, first responders were on the job. Other healthcare providers, they were all good to get through this pandemic. President Biden vaccine mandates defies science and goes far beyond the role of the federal government. We're strong-arming employers, strong-arming people, threatening the rights of millions of Americans who have jobs to earn and make a living. This action is shameful.